Good morning, I guess it is still, or good afternoon just. My name is Ian. I work in technical evangelism for AWS, which is an odd job title. A lot of my work involves working with developers and technical users to help them understand how they can use AWS to build applications and services. It's not the focus of the discussion today. I want to talk to you a little bit about something else, which is about patterns that we observe in adoption of the AWS cloud amongst large enterprises. Okay, so that's going to be the focus of the discussion for this afternoon. Just a couple of questions for you before I start, just so I know where you're at in terms of your awareness of Amazon Web Services. Who would describe themselves as having a good understanding of the AWS service model? Okay, a minority of people. Okay, so I'll try and talk a little bit about what we do first of all, just so we can get everybody onto the same page in terms of what we provide. Obviously, we're delivering technology solutions that organizations can use to develop, deploy, and operate applications and other IT workloads. Okay, so it's often in digital transformation, but increasingly, customers are putting AWS to use in the enterprise because they want to modernize their IT, lower their costs, and maybe counterintuitively for an audience that is new to AWS. Improving security is also a key motivating factor for customers to move to the cloud today. Okay? And we'll talk a little bit more as we move through some of the material that I have about precisely what this means in practice, what kind of services we provide, how some of our existing customers put those services to use today. Okay, sound good? So where are we in terms of adoption of the AWS cloud today? If you don't know a lot about Amazon Web Services, you might not know that we have over 1 million customers that are making use of AWS over the course of any 30-day period. This excludes usage by other parts of Amazon. Of course, Amazon itself, in its own right, is a major AWS customer, and pretty much every other part of the Amazon business also makes use of the AWS cloud. You can see that there's been a real inflection point in adoption around about the 2012-2013 time frame. And the reason for this inflection point I'll come to in a second, but in those early years between our launch in 2006 and that real acceleration in use of AWS, a lot of the early adoption of the cloud was amongst startup organizations. You're going to recognize a lot of the brands on this slide as disruptors that are really having a big impact on established markets and are delivering new, extremely innovative and extremely friction-free experiences for customers that want to use these digital services. So to pick a few high-profile examples, we're talking about organizations like Airbnb, Spotify, Pinterest, SoundCloud, Slack, and Gilt, all of whom are built pretty much exclusively on the AWS platform. And if you're starting a technology or other startup today that uses technology, you're going to find it very hard to raise money from investors of any type if you let those investors know that you intend to spend the capital that you're raising on infrastructure. Capital markets, venture capitalists, angel investors, and seed funds simply will not give money to startups to spend on infrastructure that can be sourced from the cloud. Using the cloud is the de facto way that you build high-growth, innovative businesses today. And we're very lucky that most customers, most organizations that are launching new products and services today that use IT resources are going to build those on the cloud. In fact, I can ask a question of you. If you were starting a business from scratch today, would you invest your capital in buying IT infrastructure, or would you start from day one in the cloud? Who's for investing in their own infrastructure? And who's for building on the cloud? It's the de facto model for new businesses. It just makes sense to do it that way. When we launched back in 2006, we lacked some of the essential features that were required for enterprises to run workloads on this platform. I won't go into a lot of detail on that today because this is not a particularly technical audience, but over the interceding period since 2006, we've worked using an iterative development model to add a lot of features to the platform which make the platform, the AWS cloud, an excellent place for enterprises to put new workloads and to migrate existing workloads to. And if you take a look at adoption of AWS today amongst large cap and mid cap enterprises, you'll find, as illustrated by the logos on this slide, that we have usage in pretty much every geography, every vertical market, and every segment in terms of sizing. Here in the UK, some of the larger and more well-known enterprise customers are organizations like News Corporation, the FT, Channel 4 Television, the BBC, Shop Direct, the Guardian, and we have wide usage across a variety of other sectors as well. So becoming the new normal really for customers to deploy applications in this way. And if you take a look at analysts' perception of the cloud, you'll also find that analysts such as Gartner have a very positive attitude towards use of AWS amongst their customers. Okay? And who here uses Gartner, by the way? I guess a substantial proportion of you do. You probably know about the way in which these quadrants are generated if you're a customer, but if you don't, it's worth just digging into it. So the quadrants are created by using something called the Gartner Critical Capabilities Assessment. And in the case of infrastructure as a service, which is what's being represented here, there's over 220 different critical capabilities that Gartner customers have indicated are important to them in selecting a cloud provider. And AWS has over 95% coverage of those 200 plus critical capability characteristics. So we have excellent coverage of the typical requirements amongst enterprises. What is very unusual about this quadrant, if you've looked at a few of them, is quite how close we get over on the completeness of vision axes. It's very unusual for technology providers of any type to be quite so far over on the right-hand side of this quadrant. And the reason for that actually is down to the way in which Amazon and AWS do innovation. Okay, so over 90% of the things that we innovate on come directly from customer feedback. Okay, and we have a set of customers that are very advanced in their usage of the cloud. You're looking at requirements from organizations like Airbnb and Spotify. They're unconstrained by legacy. They're able to attract the best engineering talent globally to their companies by virtue of their brand profile and the kind of cultural environment that they offer. And by working with these customers in that startup segment, we're able to anticipate the future needs of a lot of enterprise customers. So it's pretty common for customers to say things to us like, why is it that you always seem to deliver things just before they become a problem for us or just before we need them? And this rate of innovation, coupled with where we get our ideas from, is one of the reasons that we're able to get quite so far over on the right-hand side of that axis. Okay, so we believe cloud is the new normal. I'm going to go on now and talk about a few of these patterns that we see, and there are 4 of them that I'm going to be focusing on today. The first, as I said, is that it's just natural for startup businesses to build from scratch in the cloud. And the reasons for this really are things that I've already covered. You know, they want to be in a situation of being able to move quickly, iterate very rapidly, and if necessary, completely change direction through what startups tend to call a pivot. Okay? And if you're constrained around the inflexibility of your IT infrastructure, it's actually quite difficult to do that. So we provide a very flexible environment that allows startups to experiment, innovate, test, and deliver products and services that very accurately match the needs of their customers. They're also very fortunate, as I said, because they have no legacy. They're probably the opposite of many organizations in this room. If you're a startup, you have no IT which is older than a year old. A lot of you guys will be working with infrastructure and applications that are in the, probably 15 to 20 years oldest, and 10 to 15 years is probably normal. Yeah? So you're lucky if you're in a startup in some respects. Of course, you're not lucky because you have very limited capital. You do not have profitable revenue streams that you can use to drive your business, and you're really using other people's money. But despite that, you do see these unicorns that are able to rise very quickly in terms of customer adoption, are able to deliver these very, very distinctive service experiences and are able to challenge established brands. Some of these companies are having a really significant effect on established companies. You know Airbnb. I don't know, anyone here work in the accommodation, hospitality or hotel business? Who stayed in Crowne Plaza hotels? I definitely have. Airbnb is about 5 times as big as Crowne Plaza hotels in terms of its occupancy level. So they have about 500,000 guests per night staying with them. Crowne Plaza hotels is about 106,000 rooms of inventory. Okay? And they've grown to that since 2012. They had almost no customers before 2012. Can you imagine building a business like that with traditional technology and trying to scale it in that way? And this is the unique benefit of using the cloud if you're in a high growth startup. Now, what we've seen amongst enterprises is one of the first reasons that they've started to look at the cloud is as a defensive mechanism against these innovators. They want to have the same tools, the same capability to deliver very distinctive new product and service experiences for customers, because they don't want to be left staring at the taillights of the next new entrant, the next Airbnb. They don't want to be the next IHG hotels that's seeing a large proportion of their growth opportunity be cannibalized through new delivery models and through these new experiences. And there are some very good reasons for this, why the cloud is a good platform for innovation in the enterprise. The first is it's a capital-free model, so you don't have to pre-invest in infrastructure. If business conditions change or you want to try out a new experiment, a new innovation, you don't have to go through a long capital acquisition and planning cycle for that. You can literally turn on services. And actually, in the main part, within a few minutes, the resources from AWS to help you deliver these experiments will be available to you. Billed either on credit card or with invoice billing. So we do offer traditional invoice billing with purchase orders as you would expect from a more traditional IT supplier. The second thing is platform depth, and we're going to talk about this a lot more later, but there is a broad range and an increasing range of different services available that customers can use. It's not all about these primitive building blocks that you might use to construct platforms for applications if you've got traditional technologies. You probably think about virtual machines and databases and the kind of low-level primitives that you need. We provide a set of abstractions that allow you to consume higher-level services by specifying higher-level services. We'll talk more about that a little bit later in this session. We maintain the platform, we upgrade it, we deliver falling price, improving scalability and additional features over time, and they are natural additions to the platform without you having to maintain or invest resources in upgrade and maintenance, so you can return those resources, that time that you might have spent, into other value-adding activities. And when we release new capabilities, they're just announced and then made available for customers to use in many, many regions around the world. So you can access new high-value services very simply as well. Okay? And as I said, this has led to adoption of the cloud for these new workloads, for these digital transformation workloads, being a very common initial adoption step for enterprises. Just pick on one of these examples. Philips Healthcare, they provide medical imaging equipment and infrastructure to hospitals. In the case of this use case, we're talking about usage in the US, where we have a very important compliance standard called HIPAA that we are able to comply with, which assures the security and privacy of medical data for US citizens. It's a federal standard called the Health Information Portability and Assurance Act. And what Philips have done is modified their medical imaging equipment. So rather than sending their X-rays or CAT scans, the digital data that represents those, to storage infrastructure which is locked inside hospitals, they directly connect their imaging equipment to the AWS cloud. So when you've got your digital medical image, it's sent directly to a compliant and secure AWS storage service. You don't have to capacity plan your storage infrastructure inside your hospital. Philips have an ongoing subscription relationship with each medical provider where they charge them for the amount of medical images that they store. And they've been able to mobilize the healthcare service. So the clinicians have a corresponding tablet-based app. They can visually see X-rays and other medical imaging data in this tablet-based application securely, no matter where they happen to be located in the world at that particular point in time. So they change the experience for their customer, the clinician. They've also changed their business model by moving to this subscription-based model. And to date, they've stored almost 400 million medical images inside AWS with aggregate storage of almost 18 petabytes of data. So it's a fundamental transformation in the way in which they serve their customers, and it's enabled by the AWS cloud. A little bit more technical. Platform breadth. This is very, very important. Okay, so I mentioned already these characteristics. It's very quick to provision services. You can turn them on in just a few minutes using a couple of billing options. Your technical teams will use either our visual console or other software tooling that enables you to completely automate the process of creating, modifying, and updating and destroying resources and services. And you have access to a very broad range of different service components. We have around about 70 different services today. This means that if you want to implement something like a data warehouse or an IoT platform or build an application that requires managing large numbers of mobile identities, for example, we provide service options to fulfill those particular components of your architecture, so you don't need to source and build those yourself. You can do things much more quickly, and fundamentally you have a whole lot less to do because the platform carries the burden of many of these infrastructure components. Having said that, if you do want to consume services in a more infrastructure-centric manner, you can still do that. You can still use machines, you can still use storage, you can still build networks, and we have many, many customers that do that, bringing in existing applications that they might have in their own infrastructure and running those in the AWS cloud and just mapping over their existing infrastructure constructs onto these building blocks. It's absolutely fine to do that. We offer a very rich set of services that can help you manage that more effectively, as well as these higher level abstractions. So let's pick one example, data warehousing. It's up here, represented by this icon. It's a service actually called Amazon Redshift, which is a petabyte scale data warehouse that you can provision inside AWS in about 10 minutes. You just request the dimensions that you want in terms of capacity and performance. We will build out the infrastructure. Actually, we're using these same lower level primitives to create the warehouse out of machines and networks, because you still need all of those resources to build the infrastructure, of course. We just abstract it and present it to you as an endpoint that you can use. It takes about 10 minutes. It works with a wide variety of common business intelligence and ETL tools, and you can access many of these tools through this additional service category that we have called the AWS Marketplace that contains about 2,300 different ISV software products from vendors like Tableau, Jaspersoft, IBM, ClickView, and a variety of others. So you can build a complete data warehouse in a few minutes, test different tools that you might be considering using for a new analytics workload. If you don't like it, you can shut the whole thing down. It will have cost you a few $100s, and you can revert back to your traditional procurement process of writing a short list of vendors, allowing your procurement team to select one of those vendors with you, building out infrastructure, provisioning the warehouse, which will probably take you about 6 months is the sort of average time that I would get for that. So with that piece of context, the question that you should maybe ask yourself is, why wouldn't you try AWS before you try your traditional delivery model? And we get a lot of customers that take decisions like that and pilot in AWS, checking out whether our solutions fit their use case. It's really very low risk, very low cost. It doesn't really burden the overall delivery process that you're likely to have. Okay, just one example. So diving a little bit deeper, I mentioned before the model that we use for service development is based on customer feature requests. So the more customers tell us they need a particular feature, the more likely that we are to implement that feature as the next thing on our priority list. And because we've been iterating over a lot of our services for a long time, 10 years in some cases, we've had a lot of feedback which has come from customers like you. And this has led to implementation of some advanced enterprise features, things like very, very strong encryption and privacy controls that we can provide. So we've got a whole suite of services for cryptographic key management, enabling you to put your cryptographic keys in a location which suits your particular security and privacy policy and needs, protecting even the most sensitive data in the cloud. So whatever you're doing with AWS, please take a look at the service portfolio that we have. Please talk to our teams. We have enterprise account managers and solutions architects located here in the UK, very, very large and skilled team that can help you understand how you can map your applications and services onto this infrastructure model. And if there's something that we're not doing today that you feel we should, please tell us. Okay, that's how we prime our pump. That's how we set up this pipeline for innovation that we have for the future. And ultimately, it's how we'll make sure that we serve customers like you more effectively in the future. So if we can't help, we'd really love to hear about that as well. Okay, last thing I'm going to talk about, how do you get here? Okay, a couple of things we see. First of all, change is a constant within IT, and actually this was something that was called out in the first panel session this morning, that maybe it's the only constant, that things always change. But what we're seeing increasingly is that customers are not happy with traditional IT delivery models, are not happy with traditional supplier relationships either. And we see a lot of customers that are interested in AWS because of Amazon's unique culture. The fact that we always put customers at the front of everything that we do. I was chatting to Bill actually just before the session. It's actually impossible to start work on a product or service at Amazon if we don't have two things: a press release that will describe how the service will be represented to customers when it's launched, and a customer that is prepared to work with us throughout the development process up to that launch point and say that a customer will say that we're going to use this service. If you don't have those two things within Amazon more generally, AWS specifically, you can't actually get a service or product out to market. So it's a very different model to what I've seen historically in other enterprise IT organizations, where unfortunately much of the innovation is generated internally and not validated sufficiently with external customers. We just do not work like that. And we've also, through working with customers in this way, identified common pathways for adoption. So we've observed many, many customers, larger customers, enterprise customers, take similar paths to getting to the cloud. So one thing I might ask you to do is assess where you are on this cloud adoption journey. It may not be AWS at the end of it, but if you're going to modernize your IT and consider these new adoption models that are available to you today, consumption-based models, self-service models, where are you on this journey? How close are you to the summit? And what kind of workloads are you thinking about putting in the cloud, and how can we help you do that? Often we see customers move to these hybrid architectural models as part of this journey. We have many, many customers. It's a natural fact of complex enterprise IT. You can't flick a switch overnight and run everything in the cloud, even if you would like to do so. You've got long-lived applications that might have significant lifetimes left with them. You've got a complex environment. It's very common for customers to build this hybrid architectural model before they move to more significant adoption of AWS. I was at a retail event earlier this week actually with one of the technology leaders from Shop Direct Group, one of the largest online retailers here in the UK. They were talking about how they'd put the front end of their retail application into the cloud. They'd made some small architectural changes, and by doing that, they'd managed to get their availability on their peak trading days up from 57% to 100% on Black Friday in 2015 by combining AWS together with a slightly modified architectural pattern for better resilience. This is typical of the kind of benefits that customers can derive by using these hybrid architectural models. One other great example of a customer that's really made a lot of progress is Capital One. Now you might know Capital One in the UK as a consumer credit and credit card provider, but in North America, Capital One is a full-service retail bank, very similar in product scope to an organisation here in the UK like RBS or Barclays. So they provide a full suite of financial services. And I want to leave you on a quote actually from the global CIO at Capital One, a guy called Rob Alexander. Now Rob was on stage in front of almost 20,000 AWS customers last October at an event we run every year called AWS reInvent. And he was talking about this actually. He was talking about Capital One's launch of a brand new primary mobile channel app for US customers, which is their iOS and Android application. Okay, so if you're transacting with Capital One in the US through digital channels, that application is built natively and entirely on the AWS cloud. So we're supporting here a regulated workload, which is governed by FINRA in North America, the financial regulator for the US, very similar to the FCA here in the UK. And what Rob said during his keynote was very interesting. He said, over time, we've come to realize we can be more secure in the public cloud than we can be in our own data centers. And I want to leave that really with you as an indicator of where we believe enterprise thinking is going in terms of the awareness of security controls in the cloud and the capabilities that you have for running high criticality core application workloads on this new platform. There's nothing that you can't do today on AWS. And I'd encourage you to talk to our teams after this session, learn a little bit more about where you might be on that ascent to that summit of using AWS and how we can help you accelerate that journey and deliver some of these benefits for your organizations. Thank you.